today on the Sound Health Podcast.
So it kind of makes sense that people as they age, even if they're not the best singers in the world, to sing is something that they can be actively doing to help their brains stay healthier for longer. Is that accurate to say that?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about the health benefits of music, music reduces stress. Stress is bad for our brain cells, so we want to protect our brain cells from stress. It increases our immune function, so we're gonna stay healthier. It eases our pain. That's those endorphins that we were talking about earlier. There's a whole area of research that focuses on how music enhances movement, and that influences exercise. And those emotional benefits, like reducing anxiety and increasing our mood, is healthy for our brains as well.
Hi, this is Jim Donovan. Welcome to the show. Today we'll be welcoming Dr. Jennifer Willford to the program. Jennifer is a professor of psychology at Slippery Rock University in the great state of Pennsylvania and an expert in neuroscience, neuropsychology, and just about anything brain-related. She's here to talk to us today about what's actually happening in the brain when we do things like listen to music or sing or even chant. We'll also look at what's going on in the minds of Alzheimer's patients when they listen to music from their past. Thankfully, Jennifer has a deep understanding of why the brain does what it does, so we're happy to have her on with us today. Please welcome all the way from Western PA, Dr. Jennifer Willford. So glad to have you on the show, Jen. Let's just get right into this. I'm wondering, when we listen to music, what's actually happening in the brain?
Okay. So when we're talking about listening to music and the brain, we're using a lot of different areas of the brain, okay? So let's just kind of take it step by step. So first of all, when we are listening to music, we're using the language centers in the brain. And we use these language centers to appreciate music and understand the words of the music in the context of the music itself. Now, the language areas in the brain actually span both sides of the brain. And what's interesting is that words are processed on the left side in these regions, and the sounds of music are interpreted on the right side. So when we are listening to a song, we're actually using both sides of the brain, and they're really talking to each other. So that it requires a lot of coordination across the two sides of the brain. And then in terms of what music does to us when we actually listen to it and we feel positive after listening to music, I am not a rock star by any definition, but when I get into my car and I'm alone, I'll crank up the tune, sing at the top of my lungs.
What's your favorite thing to listen to?
And I like a lot of different kinds of music, actually.
But what do you play the loudest? That's what I want to know.
Depends on my mood. I actually have a number of playlists on Spotify, and it really kind of depends on my mood. If I'm feeling fired up, I'll listen to more rock music. If I'm trying to calm down or feel mellow, I'll listen to something a little bit more easygoing.
Nice.
I was in New York recently and having breakfast in a cafe, and they had a great playlist, and I said, "What is that?" And it was a Pandora station for brunch. So sometimes I listen to Brunch Cafe on Pandora.
Perfect.
But, we feel really good after listening to and playing music. So if we think about that as a part of listening to music and what's going on in the brain, there's a lot going on there as well. So when we're getting into our music, we're releasing a neurochemical called dopamine. When dopamine is released, it helps neurons talk to each other. And most importantly, it does this in a circuit of the brain that allows us to feel rewarded. And that particular circuit in the brain also talks to our memory circuits. So these two, this reward circuit and this memory circuit, are talking to each other. And so when we listen to music, we feel good and we want to do it more.
Why is it important that they talk to each other? Help me understand that.
Okay, so this kind of really goes way back. We have this reward system in our brain really to help us do things like make sure we eat. So like if we're hungry and we see a turkey sandwich and we're ready to eat this sandwich. And then we eat it and we feel better. We feel rewarded for that. And then we also remember that turkey sandwich helped us feel better. So in the future, when we're hungry, we're more likely to go find that turkey sandwich. And so this is how reward and memory kind of work with each other. We have an experience. It makes us feel good. We remember it. And then that helps us think, okay, I want to go back and do that again.
So like the good feeling helps to reinforce the memory.
Yeah, exactly. And so these are actually the same pathways in the brain that are the reward pathway and memory systems included are the same pathways that drugs of abuse hijack.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we become dependent on substances or addicted to them, these are the circuits that are being affected initially in that process. When we listen to music, we're strengthening that reward pathway, that feel-good pathway in a healthy way. So it's a healthy strengthening of that circuit that helps us increase our positive mood in a good way. So we can use music. We can use it as a coping strategy when we're feeling bad or stress. I used to, when I was a kid, if I was feeling bad, I would often sit down at the piano or practice my flute, and, half an hour would pass and I'd feel better. And part of the reason for that is because when we're practicing music, we're being rewarded for it. It increases our mood, and we strengthen those pathways over time so that they become more of the default pathway versus the negative pathway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm just thinking about how, now I didn't have a piano or anything like that, but I had a pair of drumsticks. And from like about age 14, actually probably age 13 to 17, I would put on AC/DC and just play in the air with my sticks. And it would be silent on my room for hours, and my mother would sort of peek in every so often just to make sure I was alive in there, and she'd see me doing my thing, playing as loud as I can in the air. And
it's
she figured everything was okay.
You say that, because we can get these benefits from playing music and listening to music.
Yeah.
But we also know from some imaging studies that if you're even just thinking about it, you can gain some of these benefits.
That makes good sense. You
don't even have to actually be doing it to get the benefit.
Like the mental rehearsal is its own solid practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that's so
I want to
helpful.
get back to, there's a lot more going on in the brain. So
let's go.
Keep going? In addition to this reward pathway, I think it's also important to mention there's more going on here that helps us feel good when we listen to music. I think this is such a big, important part of why music is so important and why everyone likes to listen to music or engage with music in some way. In addition to that dopamine neurochemical being released, we also release endorphins when we listen to music. And that's the same neurochemical that we talk about when we talk about the runner's high.
Mm-hmm.
So when people say, I get a runner's high after going for a jog, it's the same neurochemical, and we can get that from listening to music.
Is that also like a pain relief chemical?
Yeah. And so sometimes we hear about, music therapy, for example. Music therapy is an important field, and partly what's going on with music therapy is that when we release these endorphins, it helps relieve pain.
Yeah.
So music therapy is very important. There's one more neurochemical that I want to mention here because I think it's so cool. It's my favorite neurochemical, if you can have one of those. When we listen to music, we release oxytocin.
Oh, yeah.
And oxytocin is what we would consider the bonding hormone. So when we listen to music, it's especially nice to do this with other people because it helps us. We release oxytocin, and music can actually serve as a way to help us build relationships. So, being with other people when we listen to music or play music is actually really important. So
that's why I like the guys in my band so much, I guess, then. It's just chemical. It's not,
exactly.
They're not actually that nice, maybe.
Well, I think they are nice, but yeah. So kind of another big region of the brain that's active when we're listening to music is the areas in the frontal lobe.
Okay.
So the areas in the frontal lobe of the brain are what we consider kind of like the air traffic control center in the brain. It's our higher level cognitive abilities like planning, decision making. For example, let's say I'm listening to a band and they make an error, like they miss a note or something. Our frontal lobes are going to pick that up, and they'll be able to detect when something doesn't quite match up right. And so people who listen to music often or play music are going to build these kinds of executive functions in the frontal lobe. And one of the really important ones that's kind of cool is that music will activate anticipation. It helps us kind of, we don't think about this when it's happening, but what it does is it helps us think about, okay, what has happened, and kind of figure that out, and then use that to predict what's coming. Music does this for us, and we don't even realize it. So when we listen to music and play music, the brain networks are kind of creating expectations about how the music should sound.
Yeah.
And then that kind of transfers into other types of thinking abilities that we have when we're not listening to music. It just strengthens those pathways in the brain. Make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. What it makes me wonder is, so when I'm writing a song, sometimes I'll purposely put in a bridge that is unexpected to kind of foil that expectancy. Like, I think it's going to go here, but then it takes a turn. And is there anything about the surprise in music that sort of changes what's happening in the brain?
Yeah, I mean, we have part of that frontal circuitry will kind of get activated when there's novelty or when something is new, and the brain will pick up on that. And I think that feeds into the building of these expectation pathways and noticing when things in our environment change. I mean, that's it sounds, kind of like we don't think about that, but it's important to be able to notice when things in our environment changes.
Sure.
And we also need to be able to predict what's happening in our environment. So music is kind of helping us strengthen those kinds of pathways, both when things are expected and then also kind of figuring out what to do when things are unexpected, or at least being able to notice when things are unexpected.
Yeah. So it's what I'm understanding is that just the act of listening to music is good for the brain. Just being passive, listening to music passively is already good for the brain.
Yes.
Now, to go like another step into this, you've been to some of my events, and one of my passions is sharing how to reclaim the power of your voice and use it to help your health. And what I'm wondering is, when I'm using my voice for something like singing, or if I'm like chanting a mantra or doing vocal toning, what's happening in the brain? Is it different when I'm actively participating with my voice than it is if I'm just listening to somebody else's voice?
Yeah, so it is different because mainly we know this from studies that use neuroimaging, so like fMRI studies.
Yeah.
But when we put someone in the scanner and we have them sing, really large areas of the brain light up. So why that's kind of important to understand is that any other thing that we put someone in the scanner and ask them to do, we may see very discrete areas of the brain that kind of light up. And we know what those kind of important areas are. But when we're singing, large areas light up. And what's going on is that we have areas of the brain that are important for processing sound, that are important for listening. The language areas light up, the memory areas light up, the movement areas light up, emotion areas light up, and those frontal lobes light up. All of these things are being activated when we sing. It's an amazing amount of complexity. It's really cool. The kind of the take home of all of that is that when we're singing, basically what's happening in the brain is we're activating a lot of areas that have to work together. Mm-hmm. And this is really, really good for our brain. Singing offers what we would consider neuroprotective benefits because of this kind of integration and activation of many circuits. And it's a natural emotional expression.
Yeah.
So again, it brings us back to those feel-good neurochemicals that we talked about earlier. So this is really, really great stuff. And again, like I said before, when we are singing, we're activating all of these areas. But if we are thinking about singing, we're also going to activate some of these areas.
Right. I heard you say the word neuroprotective. And for someone who doesn't know that word, how would you describe that?
I just think neuroprotective kind of speaks to the idea that we want to be doing things. We want to be engaging in behaviors and activities that are healthy for our brain.
Yeah.
And we know some of them. We know exercise is good for the brain. We know, moving our bodies every day is very good for the brain. Our nutrition is important for the brain, but music is good for the brain as well.
So it kind of makes sense that people as they age, even if they're not the best singers in the world, to sing is something that they can be actively doing to help their brains stay healthier for longer. Is that accurate to say that?
Yeah. I mean, when we think about the health benefits of music, music reduces stress. Stress is bad for our brain cells. So we want to protect our brain cells from stress. It increases our immune function, so we're gonna stay healthier. It eases our pain. That's those endorphins that we were talking about earlier. There's a whole area of research that focuses on how music enhances movement, and that influences exercise. And those emotional benefits, like reducing anxiety and increasing our mood, is healthy for our brains as well.
And then what?
So it kind of spans lots of different areas in terms of how music leads to brain health benefits.
Yeah, and then the thing you were talking about earlier, where if I'm listening to music with people, that there's a social bond that happens. So does it follow that if I'm singing with a group of people, or even one other person, that I'm also activating that social part of the brain and the oxytocin?
Yes, definitely.
I don't know if you've seen this book called The Brain That Changed Itself, Dr. Norman Doidge, and it's a book about neuroplasticity. Have you seen that book?
I have not, but I'm going to put it on my list now.
I tell you what, it is just a really great combination of great stories and really interesting research. And he talks about how in the early days of neuroplasticity, how those early scientists really had to fight against the established view of that the brain doesn't ever change. That once you're born one way and that it pretty much stays the same for the rest of your life. I'm kind of oversimplifying here. But in the book, he talks about this idea that he calls brain maps, where the way I understand it is that a brain map is a way of describing how to learn a sequence of patterns for any given situation. Like maybe, here's the pattern that I do in a restaurant, or here's the pattern I do to cook soup. And that map kind of tells us what to do and what not to do so that we can repeat it over and over again.
Right.
Is brain map, is that like the accurate way to speak of this idea?
I like this idea of a brain map. It's a kind of an interesting way to kind of think about neuroplasticity. So the idea here is that when you begin learning to, like, let's say, play an instrument, and maybe you also want to sing along with, you want to play music and you want to sing. That's hard to do. And you need to build the pathways for both, and then you need to have those pathways talking to each other. So that's going to take some time to build. And I think that idea applies very well to this idea of brain maps. So, if you're thinking about, let's say you want to learn an instrument, so you're going to have to practice the instrument, and playing the music on the instrument creates a pathway that becomes very well-worn and efficient. And then you're going to also have to learn to sing the song. So you're going to learn to sing the song, and you're going to strengthen that pathway. And then you're going to try to do that together, right? So when you first start trying to do that together, my guess is you have to go pretty slow.
Yeah.
Would you think that is accurate?
That's definitely accurate for me.
Yeah. So as you practice your instrument and then your voice, as you're putting them together, you're going to have to go really slow, and that's like building, what you're doing is building the pathway.
Sure.
The musical pathways. And
yeah, like if I'm learning a really complicated song, I have to not only slow it down, but I have to take it in really small chunks, like maybe even two measures at a time, and get those really really solid, and then keep going.
Right, but then as you practice, it becomes easier and easier and easier to do. Right.
Oh, exactly.
So,
and then it becomes automatic.
Yeah. Right. So then it becomes automatic. So I actually want to segue here and talk a little bit about that, because this idea that it becomes automatic is important. When we build motor sequences, I mean, basically when you're playing an instrument and then you're using your voice, you're building kind of a sequence of events. And the little chunks that you talk about, I like to think of this as like a kind of like a recipe. If you think about the little pieces you need to learn, those are kind of like the ingredients. And then if you think about the order that you have to put them, that's kind of like the instructions for the recipe. And this is kind of how the brain builds these brain maps. It figures out what it needs, and then it starts to put them together. And these kinds of memories for these types of motor programs, and this kind of very well-practiced type of memory that becomes automated like this, relies very heavily on a part of the brain called the cerebellum, which is, if you look at a picture of the brain, it's like it looks like a little brain that sits below the big brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the memories that we store kind of in the cerebellum are very hard to forget. So the types of memories that we would store there might be things like learning to tie your shoe or learning to ride a bike. It's the kind of memories that once you feel like once you learn them, you're never going to forget them.
Yeah.
And music can get stored in this way as well. And that's why after we practice a lot, it starts to feel kind of very automatic to us. And this is really cool because it kind of ties into kind of an area of research and therapy with patients who have neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's disease. So, someone with Alzheimer's disease who maybe has forgotten the name of one of their family members may still be able to sit down and play the piano. And the reason for that is that those memories are stored in very different places in the brain. And we know that patients who have these types of disorders benefit greatly from music and music therapy. But if they actually listened to music when they were younger or played music, those memories may be stored in a different way in their brain.
Yeah, it seems like, and maybe I'm just behind the curve here, but it seems like in the last couple of years, the world is really waking up to how music can help people with things like Alzheimer's and dementia. Why do you think that is? I hear that it lights a different part of the brain up and those memories are stored differently, but what else do you think goes into that?
So, it's interesting because we've kind of come full circle on this a little bit, in that initially we studied music through case studies of patients who did have some sort of brain deficit or injury. And then basically with the invention of modern imaging techniques, we were then able to use those types of methods to study music in the brain of these types of patients. And so, we've always kind of studied them, but it's just a change in how we've done it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what we know is that music therapy has a lot of important implications for patients with these types of disorders. And it kind of ties into what we've been talking about already, in that in like an Alzheimer's patient, for example, music is going to be important for improving mood, helping them regulate emotions, and relieving stress. So it's very similar to what we've already been talking about. And people who have these disorders and listen to music generally respond very positively to it, and they react to it. You'll see their eyes light up, and they may start moving and singing. And these effects last for several minutes, or even after the music is turned off, we can still see the changes in the brain with MRI.
Yeah.
And basically, we think that this works because it's creating an environment where neuroplasticity can happen. So this idea of neuroplasticity, that we can make new connections, is important here.
So you think we can even make those new connections even if someone's diagnosed with Alzheimer's?
In the functioning neurons that remain, yes. Mm-hmm. The sick neurons, no.
I see.
It's not going to be a cure,
right,
per se, but it can help maintain function for as long as possible, and it can also improve quality of life significantly. What's interesting is in this kind of area of research, we know that patients who have these disorders, when they listen to music, they respond better when they listen to music that they grew up with. And the reason for that is that we think that it's really important, or the important kind of piece to that is that it's not just the music, but it's the link between the music and the emotional experience and the emotional memories.
Like all those things play together and reinforce, the powerful connection. That makes sense. Hey, just one more thing. So one of the things we do on the podcast is we always want to leave the listener with one thing that they can do to make their life better. And so what I'm wondering is, of all the things that you teach, what's one thing that we can leave our listeners with that they can do right away to optimize their brain health?
Okay, well, this is a perfect segue from your last question, actually, because what I think people should do is, and it's Friday, so this is possible, I think people should grab a friend, go to a concert, and dance. And the reason for this is that in doing so, your brain is going to benefit from social connection, it's going to benefit from the music, and it's going to benefit from the movement. And all of these are activities that build our brain health and resilience. Plus, it's just a lot of fun, and I like to have fun.
I couldn't agree more. And even if you don't have a concert venue near your house, just put on your jams, turn out the lights, and go.
Yep, exactly.
Get the cat and the dog there if you're by yourself in the house, and just have a party. But move your body. I'm hearing you say, and move it to music.
Yeah.
Even if you stink at dancing, it still works.
It's absolutely so important to move our bodies, and I'm not talking about like go out and run 5 miles. I mean, get up in your living room and dance, and move your body. Movement is probably, I think very soon we're going to see doctors prescribing movement.
I'm waiting. I'm anxiously waiting for that day.
It helps protect our brains in general, but it especially helps protect our brains as we age.
Yes.
So it is really, really important. I think the singing, the friend, and the dancing are all the 3 ingredients that you need.
Perfect. Well, that is so helpful. Hey, Jen, I just want to thank you for your time. And if you have a question for Dr. Jennifer Willford, you can reach her at jennifer.willford, that's WILLFORD, at sru.edu. And that'll be in the show notes as well, so if you want to check it out there, you could do that. And remember, you can always reach me here with all of your comments and feedback, and the email for that is feedback@donovanhealth.com. Well, that's it for this episode, everybody. Jen, thank you so much, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thanks, Jen.
Now, before you go, I'd like to let you know about a free resource I made for you. It's called the SoundHealth newsletter. In it, I share the latest research in music and health in an easy-to-understand form. I also share beginner-friendly music and wellness exercises that you can use every day to feel your best. When you sign up, you also get discounts and first access to all of my Sound Health products and events. Remember, it's completely free. If you want it, just visit donovanhealth.com. That's DONOVAN health.com. Enter your name and email address, and I'll start sending you new issues right away. While you're on the website, you can also read full transcripts of this show and check out a ton of other valuable resources. If you have any feedback, send me an email to feedback@donovanhealth.com. All the information presented on this show is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Lastly, come and visit us on the SoundHealth Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube channels. I'd love to see you there. The SoundHealth podcast is produced by OmniVista Health Learning and Donovan Health Solutions. For SoundHealth, this is Jim Donovan. See you next time, and take good care.